Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by writing a review on iTunes or by becoming a patron via interviewthefuture.com. My guest today is Peter Leyden, a Silicon Valley veteran on the front edge of tech since the founding days of Wired magazine, where he co-authored the iconic 1997 cover story and the consequent book, The Long Boom, A History of the Future, 1980 to 2020. He's a sought-after keynote speaker and thought leader on AI, climate tech, and the future, founder of strategic foresight firm Reinvent Futures, and currently at work on his next book, The Great Progression, 2025 to 2050. My understanding is that book is coming by HarperCollins in January of 2027, if I got this right. So, welcome to Singularity FM, Peter.
Thanks for having me in. I'm happy to be here. It's fun to be here. And I am, you're right, on deadline for this book that's going to be coming out in early 2027.
Fantastic. So we're looking forward to it. Your first book, which was originally an op-ed piece in Wired magazine, created a big splash in the 90s. And you can maybe even say a career for you for a decade or two afterwards. So I'm looking forward to see how that book, the new book, is going to be like. And we're going to talk a lot about the content within that book. So it will give us both a preview and hopefully a lot of things to think about and create some pent-up demand maybe for your book.
Great. Well, there's an interesting little parallel there because when I wrote the cover story at Wired, I also had a co-author for that and the co-author for the book, a guy named Peter Schwartz, very famous futurist at the time. And I was on staff there working as an editor at Wired. But anyhow, one of the things about the mid-90s was we were trying to explain to people the next 25 years of what would happen with the digital revolution or the internet, and even with globalization as well, because people had no idea how the world was going to work and the whole kind of thing. And like, what's a digital economy? Why does it matter? And that stuff. And what's interesting is this book, it has the same framework. And it was actually HarperCollins who came to me and said, hey, what we need now with this era of AI and some of these other technologies we can get into, but basically, particularly around AI, is like, people have a hard time just figuring out, like, how's it going to work? What's the AI economy going to be like? Like, how would I fit in? And because I think a lot of people are freaking out a little bit. And so the book is actually very similar. And that's part of the reason we're doing it. And that's part of the reason we're trying to rush it out there, too, and get it out there soon.
So the first book was kind of about the analog to digital transformation, if you will. Everything and everyone going online in a way. And this one is about, how should I put it? The smartification of everything and everyone and the world around it. The fact that, we used to have dumb things like dumb TVs, dumb watches, dumb cars, dumb appliances. And now they're all going smart because we're putting in this magic dust on them called AI. And so everything is changing because of that, just like it was in the 90s.
Yeah, although I think this one's a bigger one. I mean, I've been through this, and it sounds like you have too. There's a lot of parallels, but there's also, I think this is a way bigger deal. I do think the advent coming of intelligent machines and humans working with intelligent machines is a bigger deal and going to have much more impact really through almost all aspects of industries and fields and all kinds of stuff. So there is, it's a bigger deal, but very interesting in parallel. And so having been through one of them and watched what that did, I think it's been helpful to me to really think about this one, both the things that are similar and the things that are different. But I do think this is a huge deal. I should also put through this is I am very optimistic about this technology. I'm very positive and kind of can do about technology in general, and I always have been. Not, it's not like I don't, or not aware, or don't really engage the risks and issues around it, but so many people are gloom and doom and freaking out about all this stuff. And I'm much more optimistic about what's happening here and what's playing out. I mean, the quickest way to say about it, you had your magic dust thing is But I think it is something to say that it's like we're going from intelligence used to be scarce and expensive, i.e., in a human's brain that you took 20 years to educate and get it functional and workable and productive and useful, 20 or more, and to now it's going to be cheap and abundant, and machines are going to be able to do it. And when you make a shift like that big of a shift in something so important as intelligence, it's got ramifications on everything, because basically, if you add intelligence to almost anything, it's going to get better and better and better. Anyhow, there's a bunch of things that happen with that, and if it's cheap and easy to do, it's like, damn, we're going to do it to everything. And so it's really a big shift. The other thing about it that's different from and we can go into this at slower pace at all this, but the other one that's, I think, really one that I keep warning people about is when we were in the mid 90s talking about the future of the internet or digital technology, we had 25 years of an infrastructure build out you had to do. I mean, we could sit there in the mid 90s and say, yeah, someday you're going to have this handheld phone that's going to be connected by high bandwidth, any place in the country, any place in the world, you're going to get it. And there in the mid 90s, we had these screeching little modems and the whole thing that, like people were like, what do you mean it's going to be? Like, how is that going to happen? But also it took 25 years to make it so that was ubiquitous and you could actually rely on that stuff. That's the thing about AI. AI is now built. We have the infrastructure for it. You can kind of keep pushing out a little further with different data centers. But in general, it's running on the digital infrastructure we've spent the last 40 years building. And so it's moving fast. And so that's the one thing that's different.
So let me stop you right there, Peter, for a second, because I want to slow us down and kind of roll the tape back to the beginning a little bit so we can take it sort of step by step chronologically. And the way I like to do that is at the personal level. So first of all, I want to give a better introduction of the universe, of our listeners and the universe, to who you are and what you stand for, and how do you see yourself? Because you wear many hats. You've worn many hats over the last 3 decades. Editor at Wired magazine, which most people would know. Co-author of The Long Boom. Founder of multiple media and political startups, convener of the AI Age Begins in San Francisco series, strategic foresight advisor, and now upcoming author of The Great Progression. So if we were to meet at a bar or at a conference somewhere as colleagues, keynote speakers who meet for the first time, and I ask you, who is Peter Leyden? How would you put that in a sentence or two? Are you an intellectual, an author, an entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, an optimist? Who is Peter Leyden?
I guess all of the above there. I mean, I have a kind of an unusual background, I would say. And I guess if we have the time, I can lay it out in more detail if you want to go slow into it. But one way I think about it is I have a background. You can see my career through the lens of being an intellectual, which is more of I started out as a journalist, a writer, thinker, speaker. There's a lens you can see of explaining ideas and understanding ideas. And that even includes before tech. I was over in a foreign correspondent in Asia. I was, in literally covering China and all kinds of stuff as young foreign correspondent, a bunch of things. So there's a kind of a lens through what I call more the intellectual story. But the flip side of it is I also have an entrepreneurial background. And usually these two sides don't really overlap that much. But the entrepreneurial thing is I've literally probably started, well, it depends how you count, but 5 different things. But 2 of them were investor-backed media startups from the Valley here. On the front edge of both when YouTube first started, that was when I was like, holy shit, the capability of YouTube, which, again, sounds like you have a lot of seasoned people listening to this, but, a lot of young people just take YouTube for granted. It's like when YouTube came along, that was just like mind-blowing. It was like to put any kind of video, into the television world is just extremely expensive. And all of a sudden you can put anything up there and everybody see it and be like, oh, anyhow, for free, kind of nutty. But anyhow, so I had a startup around taking advantage of that. I had a startup around the early days of Zoom, taking advantage of interactive video, same thing, in a media company. I had a political startup that really was helping. I was bringing tech people to Washington and the very early, like think of it as like 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, trying to explain bringing politics to the internet. Meaning, I was literally there talking to like Nancy Pelosi at the time, or Chuck Schumer, and all these people were like explaining them like why they'd want to, what's Facebook, or like why they would want to use text message. In fact, you could kind of blame me. I was one of the early people that was explaining that like you could raise money with these text messages, and they were looking at me like, because in those days, it was before the iPhone and stuff like that. So, but it's like these really clanky Nokia things that people could barely even read them, rather than kind of. But the point being is I've just started there for 4 years, ran into the Obama. I worked with the Obama campaign, that first one, and that thing. So I've had a series of these things that are more entrepreneurial, you could say, and run them and hired people and raise money and the whole thing. So I kind of get that side of tech and business and media. So it's kind of an unusual blend of the two. I have been able to speak and through that write alongside my entrepreneurial things to some degree, but normally when I'm running a company, I don't have a lot of time to do that. So I kind of have these spells. But right now I'm back in the intellectual spell and trying to, and I'm not running anything right now by design. And I've basically been trying to work through the implications and the long-term, vision basically of how this AI economy and others could work, and also the geopolitical implications, the political implications, all kinds of stuff. It's a big picture look at a lot of things. So when you say, who am I? Those are the two threads. But the other thing I would say to people that is unusual, that also makes a difference in why my perspective on things, is I have an unusually broad range of subjects that I know a lot, maybe not a lot, but enough about, put it that way. In that my impetus through my whole career, from the time I was in college and East Coast and grad school and the whole thing, is to breadth of knowledge and not depth of knowledge. It was funny, I was in a PhD program at Columbia University in comparative politics, and when we got through the master's stage, and when they got to beyond that, I had to focus on this arcane PhD kind of topic that would be my one little corner of the world of political science that I would master. And I was like, I don't want to do this. It's like, this is crazy. I want to understand everything out there in the world. So anyhow, I've kind of had these succession of things, and I've traveled widely. I mean, you got up there in Canada, but I've been in 50 different countries. I was a foreign correspondent. I've been through all the continents. I've been in Africa, a bunch of places that Middle East, a lot of Americans don't get to. So what I'm doing with this book, and what I try to do in my talks and what I'm doing in my essays, I have a robust Substack series going, which has kind of laid the groundwork for my book, is to try to connect the dots between many things that are going on out there, that if you see them as an integrated whole and understand why it helps you understand what's really going on around you. Because if you look at one thing and you're just kind of freaking out about this thing's falling apart, or this thing's getting dismantled, or this thing's taken off like gangbusters, but I don't know why. It's really can be confusing and kind of disruptive to, people get freaked out by it. But if you kind of see it as a whole, say, well, the reason that's happening is because this and this and this is happening. And because of it, and why is this happening? Because we've seen this happen over here. So you kind of do a lot of connecting between history and geopolitics and, different things in my kind of work. And that is, I think, an undervalued skill that, certain people see it and they value it tremendously, but a lot of people don't see that as, they don't understand that that's really the uber skill now that I think is more needed now than ever, because of the interconnected of all this-ness of all these fields as well.
In a way, you could say perhaps that you're doing what curious people, at least since the time of Socrates, have been doing.
Well, that's true. I don't want to make it unique, but I will say it's kind of, for some fields, it's kind of unique. Like people are like, well, I'm the accountant, I'm just like doing my accountant's thing.
Yeah. You try to make sense of the world we live in. And we're going to go into the details of that. But the last kind of biographical question I have for you here is like, You moved from Minneapolis to San Francisco 30-some years ago to work with the founders of Wired Magazine, and that kind of a famous email that Kevin Kelly sent you that was like a line or two long, and you said yes to, and so on. What did you sense was happening back then that pulled you across the country to uproot your wife and your young daughter, who was, I think, 2 years old at the time, to go all the way across to San Francisco? And is the feeling you have right now in 2026 about AI kind of similar to that moment or fundamentally different from it?
That's a good question. Well, let me give the listeners a little context here. First of all, I was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesotan, but I left to go to school, college, grad school, lived in different places, was a foreign correspondent, a bunch of things. But I got married back in Minnesota with my wife, who's a Brit. Anyhow, we went back there and she wanted to get to know my family. And anyhow, so we were hanging out there and had our daughter. And one of the things people don't really realize if they haven't been tuned into technology for a long time is the Twin Cities, Minnesota, was one of the 4 key hubs of the world of computing before personal computers. So everyone thinks of personal computers, the Silicon Valley and a personal computer, that's the beginning of tech. No, there was a whole kind of mainframe. There was supercomputers. There was, what they called minis. Anyhow, they had a series of different stages of the digital revolution. If you really go back to World War II, where the mainframe started. And one of them the hub happened to be the Twin Cities. And there was, all kinds of Cray computers, UNIVAC, control data. A bunch of them were there that back in the day, I'm an older guy. So, people, your younger viewers aren't going to really remember these things. But these were like before Silicon Valley really exploded around the PC, they were the big players there. So anyhow, weirdly, I was exposed to computers very early, like in high school and stuff. I was coding in the, and again, very early days of the internet. I mean, I remember I was on the internet when it was literally just a bunch of advanced universities on the internet. And my little high school was able to kind of tap into it because a lot of the kids from the computer, the parents of the computer, who are the dads basically, who were running the computer companies. I was in school with them. So anyhow, the long story short is I was exposed early to technology. And so when I came back from the foreign correspondence thing, covering China and various things, got married, I also was like, holy shit, this internet thing is just starting to really break out. And so it was at that stage that I was from there, that base there, I started doing some early stories on this. And that's when Kevin Kelly read my stuff, and you made allusion to a story that other people wouldn't know, but basically he just literally sent me an email. He was the founding executive editor of Wired, an iconic original thinker to this day, just a real sage and seer in the tech world. Anyhow, at the time, he just sent me a two-line email just saying, hey, would you like to work for Wired? It would require moving to San Francisco, period, boom, that's it. And I said, sure, and I just moved there. But so that's the story behind it. But the feeling then was I did feel in those early days that the internet was going to break out. Like I said, I've been exposed to it in the 70s and things. And when it was literally just DARPA and some advanced universities. And I used to play Space War actually with Illinois, Champaign, Urbana, and MIT and Stanford. There was like about 6 universities you could play with, the students there. But so I knew early in a way that wasn't just the average knucklehead thinking about the internet. It was kind of like, oh, okay, now it's time's come. It was starting to break. And so that's what connected me to Kevin. And Kevin got me out there to early Wired. And then I started running from Wired. I will say the thing about AI that's been interesting, because then I've been out here ever since. I've been over here over 30 years in the Bay Area here. And track this a million ways, kind of up and down everybody out here. Not everybody, but, been around. So know a lot of the people over the years here at the tech. What's extraordinary about the AI thing, which we forget about, when ChatGPT broke out in November of 2022, it surprised like 80% of all the AI experts. I mean, it blew away everybody in the Bay Area, except for a handful of people that were working on the latest iterations of that stuff. And it even surprised me. And I've had I used to run a series, as you mentioned, on the AI age, and would have all the top people there and talking. And I knew I've had people like Adam Chair, who's the co-founder of Siri that Jobs bought before he died. And he said, I'm one of those people that I've worked for 40 years in artificial intelligence and 30 of them in conversational AI. And he said, I never thought I would see this day in my lifetime. He literally just said, I just assumed, humans would eventually figure this out, but it was going to be 50 more years or something. That's literally, and it wasn't the only guy. Half of them, tons of them were like that. And so I think what's interesting about the AI thing is how quickly it's surfaced as the main story. So, and because it doesn't require the infrastructure like the internet did, it's so fast. And so what's happened is just been an extraordinarily fast engagement with this story. And as we talked earlier in the conversation here, it is the implications of artificial intelligence are much bigger than just connecting everything up. Connecting everything up was a big deal. And we were trying to explain to people how big a deal that was. And it's proven to be a big deal. Like, look at the world we're in now. But AI is bigger. And so I think it's, when you ask me what my feeling is, it's like there is a resonance of that. But I would say it's just more intense and more accelerated feeling now, like, holy shit, this is going to move fast. Now, one other parallel to this that I've actually used in the book, and because I've been wrestling with this book, I've literally just been writing it the last 6 months and up to my eyeballs in it. But the other deja vu feeling I have in it is in the early days of the internet, people in San Francisco and the Bay Area or Silicon Valley broadly, San Francisco Bay Area, there was a kind of a consensus on how big a deal the internet was. And then when you left the Bay Area or other tech hubs, because I don't want to preclude it's only the Bay Area, but you'd go to average people or, because I do a lot of public speaking and things like that, a lot of business conferences. And, people were just really underplaying and underappreciating it and just kind of thinking, okay, whatever, this thing. What is interesting now is a similar disconnect. It's not quite the same because back in the internet days, it was like they thought the whole thing was kind of nutty and ridiculous and why do we care? Now that's not that. They're just freaking out about what's going on. But what they don't really see is there is absolutely a different understanding around the potential of it. And there's a thing called Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, and anyhow, he's been around for a long time. Anyhow, he's kind of coined this thing about there's a San Francisco consensus about generally AI. Maybe you've discussed it on your program, but basically there is a kind of a general sense of that kind of has to do with how big a deal it is, how fast it's moving, and that scaling LLMs and stuff will get us to AGI within a few years, if not. Anyhow, there's a bunch of things that people are kind of agreeing on in general in here. And that is not when you leave, you kind of, meaning go talk to people in other parts of the country or the world, which I do quite a bit. There's not that same appreciation. So I think, and sometimes there's more of and that ends up as fear. It ends up as either denial or kind of fear. And fear leads to, hey, shut down all the data centers or, stop it or pause it or, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a problem because, so anyhow, that's one of the things I'm grappling with here. But I think we're running into this, the things are moving so fast that I think what we need to do is we need to bring everybody along here in a way that kind of, not just in the full understanding of the details of the technology, although that's part of it, but it's also in the positive potential of this stuff. This is the thing that's so bizarre to me is like people who are the biggest critics of this, they're not the critics of tech or big tech or the Valley or whatever. They can go, they have all their anti-everything things, but they champion causes that could be transformed for the better with AI. It's kind of like people think it's like AI is only going to make the rich richer and poor is going to be poor. It's like, no, it's the opposite, dude. It's like top corporations have always had access to AI in some focused way. If you had enough data scientists and coders, you could kind of get a search engine to work and make money off it. Now it's like anybody can talk to it and use it, and they can build a business and do whatever the hell they want to do. I mean, that's like crazy. And for $20 a month, I mean, that's like nutty. And it's going to get even crazier. It's going to be like, rich people have always had tutors. It's like now if every kid can have a virtual tutor for nothing or for nothing. I mean, that's democratizing. That's better for everybody. So I think there's this weird thing now that there's this sense, and I think it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what does technology do. Technology takes always things that are expensive and scarce, and they make them cheap and abundant. I mean, it's like always. It's like the iPhone or whatever. It's like it's not only rich people run around with iPhones. I mean, every peasant in Africa has one. I mean, it's so it's kind of this weird flipping the logic of tech upside down and saying, no, folks, we're entering. And this is why this word abundance keeps coming up all the time in tech circles, or even now increasingly in political circles, because we're moving into an era where we could actually go from an era of scarcity, fighting over the small pie that we're all going to try to get our little piece of, to a sense where we could actually expand what's possible and make things more abundant, more cheap, and get them to everybody. And I think that's the kind of weird thing that's not clicking with people, right? A lot of people.
Yeah. And I've had Peter Diamandis on my podcast.
Oh, yeah, well, he's like the classic. I mean,
he's the abundance person, together with his co-author Stephen Kotler. And I just had my previous guest on the show was Stephen Kotler, and it's like the third interview we've done with him for the past 15 years. I've done 3 with Kevin Kelly too. But I do push on the abundance occasionally, and in some ways, like, for example, the fact that technology takes things that are expensive and makes them cheap, obvious, 100% true. But the important part to me as an ethicist and a philosopher is like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And the answer usually is I don't know. Because if you're like me, someone who grew up in a communist country behind the Iron Curtain, I knew that back in the day in Bulgaria, surveillance was impossible and expensive. Today, technology has made it cheap and accessible and easy, right? So whether it's a good or a bad thing, it depends on a variety of other things. And I'm not so interested in the thing itself. I'm more interested on the effects or the impact of it on our society, on us as an individual, on our civilization in general. And that's why one of the reasons I brought you here is because you have that kind of a big picture overview, historical overview with big epochs and time periods. And so we can have this conversation. So let's dive in here with first historically of what you've done and then what you're currently doing. So historically, you're the author of The Long Boom, A History of the Future, 1980 to 2020, and that was a 1997 op-ed piece in Wired magazine, then became a book, translated into many languages, launched your career big time, etc. So for listeners who haven't read it, what is The Long Boom in short? What did it get right and what did it get wrong?
Well, okay, so that's a great point. Well, first of all, excuse me, The Long Boom cover story, which is a huge cover story, Wired got a ton of reaction at the time. And then the book, like you say, as you mentioned, went in a bunch of different places. So what we were saying was not an outright prediction like this is exactly what's going to happen. But what we were trying, and this is an important thing because it relates to my book now, it was trying to explain, here's what's possible to do now, people. It's like you weren't thinking through the implications. So we were just trying to say, and we're trying to be more positive about it. Like, so people at the time were saying, this is literally from my time at Wired, like they were saying, well, no one's going to put their credit card on the internet. That's like crazy. Who would put their credit card on the internet? And they're all just worried about, crime and the criminals are going to use it. Anyhow, that was where the conversation was, right? And we were like, well, what happens if we connect up, by 2020, which is our endpoint, the fact was we had connected 4 billion people, like 60% of the planet. It's now about 75%, and it's on its way with Starlink and everything else. It's going to be 100%, this decade. And so the point is, we just said, hey, when this happens, here's what's going to happen. One of the things that's going to happen is that the tech companies that normally are constrained by their national borders and have been previously, or any company, they're going to have a global market, right? Everyone's going to connect to the same damn global thing. And so it's not going to be that Google's going to bring in ads from the States. It's going to bring in ads from everywhere. And so you're going to find trillion-dollar companies. I mean, they're going to be crazy big companies. And, people are like, at the time, like, what do you mean? What's an Amazon? Amazon's a stupid thing. Like, who's going to buy books on the internet? Honestly, that was where it was. So anyhow, the point is there were implications of the major through line of the technology that I would say me and my co-author, again, a guy named Peter Schwartz, who I worked with him there, and I worked at another strategic foresight company of his called Global Business Network with another guy named Stuart Brand, who's also very famous, big picture, positive, optimist dude. Anyhow, Kevin's part of that whole thing. Anyhow, there's a kind of network of people that I've kind of been enmeshed with for my life, mostly optimistic about this technology. But anyhow, Peter and I basically roughed out from the mid-90s. We said, okay, by 2020, we'll connect up all these people, these computers, the Moore's Law will continue, and we're going to have these very powerful supercomputers in our hands. We're going to figure out ways to wirelessly bandwidth everything. And it won't be in the cities. It'll be all over the place. And anyhow, we started to just lay out the rough thing. That was almost nailed at 100%, and so that was that. The other thing we did do, and then the other one we talked about was globalization. Because again, even though it wasn't just a pure tech play, it was tech enhanced it a million ways. So basically, the digital revolution coincided with globalization, and they were related, but they were different. And so we also said things like China, which again, people forget this. My first time in China was literally I was there at Tiananmen Square in '89, and I think
during the uprising.
Yes, I was in China. I wasn't in Beijing at that time. I was in I was working for Newsweek at the time. I was the young guy. They sent me I was in Tibet under martial law. I was in a Chinese jail for a while. Got arrested for covering the protests and stuff. Anyhow,
wow.
There's some stories with China. I can tell you that. But I've been watching China for 35 years. And in 2000, China was like had 1 billion rural peasants that were like, living on $2 a day. I mean, they had most of the country was in extreme poverty. I mean, people forget this. But since 2000, when they got invited into the world, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and really globalization kicks in around 2000, think of it as. From that on, now they're these superpowers. Well, we were saying that. We were saying, hey, this globalization thing is, China's going to be this, and we're going to be a superpower at the end of it, and boom, boom, boom. We also said, hey, climate change is going to go nuts here. We got a handle on climate change. We were more optimistic. Again, we're projecting the positive side of this. We said, we can transition to these new clean energies. We hope we do. But we got that one, you could say, more wrong because we didn't understand the total backlash on it. So anyhow, there were some big through lines that proved totally nailed it. There were some smaller things which was interesting. In the original Wired article, we did 10 what we called scenario spoilers that could disrupt the log boom, and so again, Peter and I kind of worked out. Here's 10 things that could well happen in the next 25 years that will cause problems or slow down or could potentially disrupt the transition to this digital future that we're laying out there in many of the positive ways. And damn, by 2020, all 20 of them had happened. Or all 10 of them had happened. And in fact, became a meme in the internet. In fact, Gibson, I'm spacing on his name. But anyhow, there's a couple of famous sci-fi people.
William Gibson.
Yeah, he right. He went back. Neuromancer, right. He went back and he got our 10 scenario spoilers and he sent it around in Twitter at the time. in 2020, and he said, "Damn, these guys didn't get all 10 of them right." But here's the funny: so we had said, "Hey, it's possible we're going to get, we're going to basically get Russia's going to go back in because at the early time, I mean, Russia. Well, it sounds like you were in the Soviet Union, yes, or so, yeah. So at the time when we wrote it in the mid '90s, we were like, hey, things could go good and everything. Could go. We said, hey, there's a good chance that Russia's going to go back into kind of nationalist kind of backlash against the democratization process, and of course they did. And so we were just saying, things that are going to slow down globalization. Well, if they do that, okay, they did it, and then we said, well, but we even said like a global pandemic. We said, you know what? There's a good chance with all the flying around and everything we're going to do is we're going to have another global pandemic. And damn, if we didn't have the global pandemic. I mean, it's literally in 2020. So like we hit it right on deadline. So here's the interesting thing about this. Even though we would throw a bunch of, we also said that the European Union, which was integrating in the 90s, we said it's possible they will essentially start pulling apart. And, that was Brexit would happen. And, we started to see all the, so there were a bunch of things we were saying, hey, not everything in ahead of us is going to be hunky dory. And we got to keep an eye on these things. But the main thing is that even with all those things happening, it did not slow down the bigger story about the spread of the technology, the interconnecting of everybody, the rise of China. A lot of these things were just baked in. And no matter what happened, it wasn't going to slow that stuff down. So that was a kind of interesting story. When I look back on that story, that process was not that we didn't nail everything perfectly, but that even the things we were most worried about didn't stop the general thrust of the main story. Now, there's a lesson for that now, which is what I'm trying to wrestle with now is what's the next 25 years of the AI economy, the scaling up of clean energy, and also bioengineering. I'm getting into that. So we can go into what we talk about the tech, but it's not just digital tech. I mean, particularly bioengineering is this a really fascinating area, and the next 25 years is going to be huge impacts in that world. So I kind of lay out the next 25 years of how all three of those world historic, game-changing technologies are going to play out. But on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of fucking crazy shit that's going to happen in the next 25 years too. I mean, bioterrorism and all kinds of stuff could happen, but will it stop bioengineering its tracks? No, but it's probably going to break out something, and it's going to be a problem. So anyhow, I'm trying to balance the potential positive things, but also the realistic kind of sense that, not everything's going to work. I mean, shit's going to happen. It kind of underlines that you were teeing up a little bit ago when we started this part of the conversation is, but my general sense is the good outweighs the bad. All three of these technologies are step changes in human capability that we absolutely need to embrace and will embrace. And there's no stopping them at some level. You're not going to say, well, let's forget about AI.
Yeah, I think it's quite visionary and shocking in a way that, as William Gibson pointed out, all of the 10 sort of...
Oh, you saw that? Did you see that thing?
I'm a big fan of his. I'm a big follower. I've read like most of his books.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it didn't seem to slow down the progress of those things. So that in that way, it was visionary, even above and beyond its own expectations, that even the things which you saw as sort of dark horsemen didn't slow down the progress. On the other hand, some other things like, for example, space, Mars, those were things.
Yeah, we thought we didn't think we'd get to Mars. But that was more, to be honest, when we threw that in, that was kind of more like cherry on the cake. I mean, that was just like, that's not fundamental to what the future was, but we thought it'd be a nice way to tell a story. Like, we eventually get to Mars. You're right. We didn't do that. There was another one that I will say that also was another weird one that tech people might interesting is we thought at the time, and again, some of your listeners are like probably just born in the 90s, but in the 90s, we actually thought hydrogen fuel cells were going to be the actual way that we were going to get off of internal combustion engine and oil. And that was not just us. There was a emerging consensus at the time, and that was completely wrong. So, but the idea we were going to try to get off of the internal combustion engines, we needed to get to a clean energy version. It eventually became batteries and, electric vehicles. I mean, that story isn't that different than, well, they happen to be, the technology happened to be hydrogen fuel cells. But looking back on it, I'm kind of glad it went the electric battery way, frankly. I mean, it kind of played out better. It was a better scenario. But from the 90s, like, we were sitting there going, well, I don't know.
Yeah, and in all honesty, the hydrogen cell technology has not been abandoned completely. There is actually some new sort of alliances between several car manufacturers, including, I think, Mercedes, who is trying to kind of keep some eggs in that basket, if you will.
The Japanese too. The Japanese love.
They're the major proponents, but even Mercedes is putting some eggs in that basket now, as of more recently. But it looks like right now, especially given what's happening in China, electric is going to be the way. I mean, we have a 13-year-old car, and it's running perfectly well. I have a fantastic mechanic, and I want to drive it for as long as possible for a variety of reasons. It's ethically the best thing to use a vehicle for as long as possible rather than have that kind of throwaway mentality. But also because I think the next car we're buying is definitely not going to be an ICE car. And here in Canada, we're a little bit behind. We're not like Norway. It's mostly because of the longer distances and people have range anxiety. And also north of the city, north of Toronto, there is no charging stations and stuff like that. So that's the problem from our point of view. So that's why I'm trying to use our internal combustion engine for as long as possible. And then hopefully the next one will be ready with the system to have an EV. But anyway, that may be actually an interesting segue to China and then hopping into your current book. So you went from Minnesota to Silicon Valley in the 90s because that's the place where things were happening. Now, if you were to advise a young person today, some of our audience who have been born in the new millennium and who want to be in the center of where it happens, and now you've been following China for 35 years. You were there during the Tiananmen Revolution. You were in jail in Tibet, apparently, and stuff like that. A lot of people, especially people who have been to China multiple times, say that the West in general is like 40 or 50 years behind to the level of technological development, systemic integration, high-speed rail, internet connection, drone development and deliveries, you name it. There's so many systems, technological systems coming together in China already at such an advanced level. The one that annoys me the most, and that I was trying to tell Mercedes last time I went there, is that China banned the flat door handles that Tesla came up with originally. And now they're kind of getting really popular here, but China's already banned them, I think, from 2027 because a number of people have died or burned in their car, and they're unsafe. And so now the future cars, whether Mercedes or Tesla, that would be sold on the Chinese market, I think it's 2027, have to be redesigned so you can actually pull the door and not have it flat. Because people, when they crash and the car is burning and they're passed out, no one can open the door. Wow,
that's fascinating.
So
I didn't know that.
And so that's just one example where even their legislation in some ways is ahead of ours. So if you were to advise one of our young viewers today, or if you were back in time like today young, would you go again to Silicon Valley, where apparently a lot of the AI algorithms are happening, or like transformers and other breakthroughs, you name it, but also there is infinitely more, you could say, in all kinds of other disciplines, including alternative energy, solar, and even biotech, if you will, especially given that I think their level of engineers and bio PhDs and all kinds of other experts literally dwarf by number all of the West engineering graduates combined by a factor of, I don't know, I don't know if it's 3 or something like that. So would you go to China? Would you go to Silicon Valley, or would you go somewhere else?
Well, it's a good question. It's kind of a nuanced answer here. Let me give it to you. First of all, I was just back. I mean, I've been going, like you say, I was there 35 years ago when no one went to China. You know, it was like, but I've also was just there last fall for a month in partly for the research for this book, and I've been between there a bunch of times. So I kind of know China. I wouldn't call myself a China expert, but enough to know like a lot about China. And I'm not a China hater. Let me just be clear on this. There's a whole kind of new Cold War with China. China's the enemy. China, trying to plug them into that Soviet Union slot. And I think that's just wrong. I just think that's not true. It's not the Soviet Union. It sounds like you grew up under the shadow of that. But so you might have strong opinions of this. But I mean, I remember that system too. I mean, the thing is about the old Cold War is there was no interaction between the two systems. There was no technology overlap. There was, we were both trying to proselytize the world and expand all over the world and, in opposition to each other. That's not China. China is totally entangled with our economy. They're totally entangled with the global economy. They've also, in their entire history, even when they were the most sophisticated civilization on the planet, they've been around for 5,000 years. They never went like, let's take over Africa or let's, expand and take over. They're not that expansive in that respect. I mean, so there's a lot of things that I just think are these old ways of thinking about going forward with China that I think is part of my book. I'm going to explore a little bit more about that. And we could get into it if you want to. But so anyhow, I'm not a China hater, but I'm also would say this to anyone. If you're speaking to someone in the West or outside of China, I'd be really cautious about moving to China. And the reason is, it's kind of, you alluded to it earlier, is like it is absolutely authoritarian state. It is absolutely locked down on kind of personal and political, certainly political freedoms of any sort, but also personal freedoms too. I mean, and with AI and with the kind of surveillance now and video cameras everywhere, everything else, it's just getting worse. I mean, you could get away with a lot more when it's just what I would in my earlier iterations of going to China, but it's now like it's it's totally locked down. And also Xi Jinping, who's the supreme leader now, he's figured out a way that's be there for life. What you don't want to be part of is a society that's a total authoritarian autocracy that has no way to change course unless the supreme leader deems it. That's just like social suicide, basically, over time. Because, they never work out. I mean, never. Like, there's never been an authoritarian state where the ruler at the top says, you know what? I don't really know what's going on. I'm going to pass it on to the next guy and let's figure out a new way to get it. No, they're all turned maniacal and they're kind of completely controlled and they try to give it to their kids and the whole thing, I mean, you grew up in the Soviet Union. I mean, it's like, and then to change the system, the entire system has to collapse to get to the change because it takes, 100 years to get to that point. Anyhow, China has got a huge thing to get over, is to get beyond that Communist Party and eventually do a war, a kind of an environment that someone who's used to the West would say, awesome. That's one thing. The second thing is the world is not going to China. I mean, they might go there to like on a 2-week trip to, talk to the manufacturing crew there or something. But there's no expatriate world. There's no kind of dense, Silicon Valley. I mean, there's more people from all over the world in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area here than there are Americans. I mean, in fact, that's an issue. I mean, that's one of Trump and that is like drumming up issues because people, it's like there's more Russians and there's more, Indians, Chinese. There's tons of Chinese. I mean, the whole AI world, the Bay Area is filled with Chinese. So anyhow, the point is, it's a polyglot culture in the West, and particularly in Silicon Valley. It's way different. Because I was just in Shanghai, I was just in Beijing, I was just in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's, I don't know how much you or your readers have been in there. I mean, Hong Kong's just docile now. I mean, China just totally fucked it over in 2019, 2020.
I was supposed to do a keynote speech there, and actually it was supposed to be at the university. And the events were unfolding right there, and obviously the whole event got canceled and But then I watched these whole documentaries where the students were actually barricading themselves in the university with Molotov cocktails and everything and fighting off the police and the authorities. And eventually everything got crushed sooner or later. And now, of course, all those people have decades-long sentences and stuff like that. And I didn't grow up in the Soviet Union. I was in one of these sort of satellite states, which were very closely aligned with the Soviet Union. And that has given me the fear of that kind of a system for life. And, you know, I'm a severe critic of the United States of America, especially in the last few years.
Yeah, fair enough.
But if it were to come to for me to choose where I would be, no question about it. I would take the West in America. And I think Canada is the best personally for a variety of reasons. I'm very partial. But I would take even America over China and Soviet Union any day, any time, without any hesitation.
Yeah, well, so there you just answered your question for your student. I mean, you know, get to know it, go over there a ton, explore, you know, the whole thing. And also, the Chinese people are wonderful. I mean, I don't speak
But that
Mandarin.
leads us to another point, though, that I care about, and I wanted to see how you would react. Because to me, the technology is not about the technology. The technology is kind of like a tool or you know, take the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, you know, the Western Europeans, the Eastern Europeans, the Germans all had roughly the same technology. But some people built democracy, some people built fascism, and some people built communism. Right? On the same railroads and airplanes and, you know, trucks and cars and this and that and industrial manufacturing, right? So the technology is very important, but it's not, to me, the most important thing. And that's kind of part of the conversation that I've been trying to have for the last 16 years. How can we direct and steer technology towards the better rather than the worst? Because we've seen that the worst can be really terrible. Okay, so let's talk about your thesis here. The Great Progression thesis. Can you please share with us the argument that you'd want a historian writing 100 years from now to understand? Walk us through these epochs, 85-year-long or 80-year-long cycles that you talk about, the fourth reinvention of America, the three transformational general purpose technologies that you already mentioned and stuff. Give us the argument, if you will.
Okay. And this, of course, is a 12-chapter book that eventually you're happy to read it, or listen to it, or whatever you want to do it. But so it's hard to kind of squeeze everything down to its essentials. Although I do it. I mean, I do a lot of keynotes myself, and I do a version of this in about an hour. And I do interviews and stuff where I'm trying to do it. So I'm kind of just pushing back a little bit, saying, yeah, there's a lot to be said there. But let me just frame it this way, which is the general way I kind of try to, and you've got enough background on me, relatively positive guy, tech guy, and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have to kind of go into the real foundations of this. But I would just say to most people, it's like, I think people, we're living through a unbelievably extraordinary moment in history. I mean, it's kind of like it's so rare. It's rare on several levels. But the first level is we're watching the arrival of three world historic general purpose technologies that are giving humans a step change in our capabilities. They're all coming at the same time. So, and again, I made quick references, but the way I explain it to a general audience in the book and in my talks is AI, okay, machine intelligence. You don't have, people get that. We're in this audience, we don't have to go into that. We'll have to be deal. Clean energy technologies, though, which is the second one, which I think is one that needs to be driven home. So people outside that field don't really fully get it. What's happened with clean energy is we have now, energy's gone from a commodity forever before, it was always a commodity, to a technology. And now that shift does two things. It actually drives down, with a technology, you can keep driving down the cost. And there's a whole rights law and a bunch of Swanson's law and a bunch of things in a book I'll go into why this is. But it's just battery, solar, all that stuff has just been going on this cost curve that's just been crazy, and it's going to keep going. And then it's also spread into all kinds of things in the tech stack. The whole electric stack, the whole thing. So there's this crazy thing happening, and that means once it keeps getting cheaper, but then you don't have to shovel commodities into it and pay for it. And so what we're getting towards is within sight, and I understand the baseload stuff, and there's a million ways to talk about this in a more sophisticated way, but in general, we're heading towards a world of abundant clean energy that will actually get us off of majority fossil fuels, and it will actually eventually will solve climate in general. So there's this kind of crazy thing that we're watching. Now, fusion energy's in there too, and that's all over here in the Bay Area. There's tons of these startups now. I mean, it's literally a real thing. We're going to have essentially commercial fusion energy in the 30s and certainly 40s. It might not make a huge difference in the next 25 years, but eventually 21st century, it's going to be that. So, and even without it, we're going to be damn close to getting this. So anyhow, that is just a major thing. It's just like we're watching the entire, energy system of the planet shift like in front of our eyes. I mean, what's going on now in, the Gulf, it's the 20th century war over oil. I mean, what's going on with Trump? Trump and the Texans have basically tried to take power in the States to kind of stop the electric future. It's like civil war around energy. And so anyhow, that's going on. And then the third thing is humans can now engineer living things. I mean, we've known how to engineer inert things, dig metals up and fire them up and build shit out of that. But we can do it with living things now, including ourselves. I mean, that's just like mind blowing. Like we didn't even know what DNA was, in 1950. And now we're like, kind of fine tuning, genetic engineering of, viruses and shit. So it's like all at the same time. And so, of course, they're all going to build industries around each other. There's going to be a ton of wealth that's going to be made in this stuff. It's going to kind of empower all kinds of people to do crazy new things that we never thought was even possible. And so that just alone should just make people just shake their heads and go, holy shit, I'm alive during that time? That's like nuts. I mean, that's like a crazy moment to be alive. So that's one thing. The second thing that's happening is in America, I would say, and I'm in America, so I'm the lens of this, but it's important for anybody outside America too, because America kind of is the breakthrough innovation place. At least as of now, I would love to see other people might supersede them over time. But so far, that is not true, which is why AI is happening here and not, everyone's playing fast catch up, particularly China. China's good at what I would call iterative innovation or incremental innovation. And they refine ideas.
Imitative innovation.
Well, it could literally start like that, but I'll give them credit now. Now they're kind of iterating, the electric cars and stuff in ways that it's not like copying Tesla anymore. So anyhow, the point is, but it's not breakthrough innovation. It's not kind of completely new shit because if you grow up in China, like your brain is different because you've been surrounded by people who are watching you your whole life. And, you've been memorizing shit as opposed to like creatively fucking thinking out how to blow shit up and try stuff. So anyhow, there's a whole cultural thing in there too. But anyhow, the point is for a lot of people, what's going to happen in America now? So I'm saying what's going on in America right now is something that happens about every 80 years in America. You can see this absolutely through the history. And for people who don't fully understand American history, the short answer is about every 80 years, America reinvents what it is to be America using that era's new technologies, general purpose technologies, and reinventing systems of the economy and society around that are able to be new models that scale and fill out the next 80 years. And that, to be fair, although there's used to be Europe was doing primarily that kind of innovation. But since the Enlightenment, America has been the one that does that. And then other people adopt that model. And that's all good. Everyone should try that, better thing. And so the closest thing we've been through now is what happened after World War II, which is essentially the whole post-war economy, the boom, but everything, IMF, UN, World Bank. I mean, institutions just overnight being created, globally to change the whole thing. Anyhow, we're in a moment of that kind of crazy innovation time. But America went through it twice before. The time before that was literally 80 years before 1945 was the end of the Civil War. And we built the fucking post-Civil War thing.
1865, you mean?
1865. And that was 80 years. It was literally, there's a whole reason why 80 years if we want to get into it. But basically, so we created this whole thing after the Civil War, total booms, tons of progress, incredible infrastructure build-outs, railroads in that case. We went from basically 30,000 miles of railroads pre-Civil War to like 175,000 miles in the 25 years after the Civil War. I mean, it essentially recreated a national, continental level economy, which no one had ever seen. So anyhow, there's these moments of reinvention. And then, of course, the original one was essentially the founding of America. So we're in that. And so, but now it's with AI. And now it's clean energy, AI, and I would say bioengineering is going to have a piece of the puzzle. But anyhow, it's around those technologies. But it also has to deal with inequalities that got all whack and all the shit that's fucked up. And, anyhow, so many gummed up systems that are not working anymore. But this happens at every juncture. All the gummed up systems don't work and everything doesn't work. And so slavery was the classic one. And here's the other thing about it. Every one of these junctures in American history has basically had a civil war around the people who wanted the old thing, hanging on to the old thing. The Civil War was slavery. Now it's carbon energy, you could say. I mean, but also there's people hanging on to the old national, welfare state. That's the left, the center side. Doesn't want to touch the bureaucracy. Right of center is don't touch carbon energy. Anyhow, they're the 20th century models. They're past their prime. They're causing more problems than we need. We got to take them down. Honestly, if Trump takes down the bureaucracies, fair. Because I'm generally more left of center of that, but it's like, but we also got to take the rights. Anyhow, the point is, it's the old systems. We got to get beyond them. And so what happens is you polarize the politics. You have these crazy moments like we're in now, but then we reconfigure a new majority of people in the other side of this thing, which is happening now, coming off of Trump. I'm telling you, Trump is not the future. Trump is the wrecking ball of the old thing. There's no way that dude is going to pull off authoritarian, anything. He's already lost everybody. His whole coalition's falling apart in front of his own eyes. I mean, that creates the political space for the next majority coalition, 60-40 majority, that then builds around the next systems and creates the next things. This happened after World War II. It happened after the Civil War. It happened after the founding. We're in that. The weirdest thing about this, if you really want to talk about it, it's another way to think of the story, which is another chapter or two of the book, is these technologies are so game-changing and so world-changing that we're literally in the scale of what I would call civilization scale change, which when you say that, most people just roll their eyes like, what the fuck are you talking about? But honestly, I see you nodding there. It's like, if you kind of understand this, like the system built around intelligent machines permeating everything, as you mentioned, is so fundamentally different from one without intelligent machines, run on mechanical engines, which was the Enlightenment thing. It's like you got to redesign everything at some level, at some fundamental level. And so then you're talking about a thing that works so differently from the old thing that you're like, okay, this is a new thing. And this thing is kind of where we're going. And I think I'm not going full, I'm cautious on saying we're in that moment right now. Two things I'm waiting for is how big a deal is AGI? Like how transformative is it and how powerful is it? I think the jury's out a little bit on that. And the second one is how much appetite does America still have for that kind of change? It's not clear to me we have it. There's too many people hanging on to the old shit and they don't want to try new things. And so I'm not saying that's happening, but I am saying the fourth reinvention is happening. It's unstoppable now. It's happening. And you're watching it and around it. And once you take that perspective, you think, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. Okay, it's not the old thing's falling apart. It's like, or it is falling apart, but we're just building a new thing, right? And so that's the framing that's happening. So that's your main thing. The thing that if it's a civilization scale change, I'm throwing a lot of history at your viewers here, then the comparable thing is the last time humans invented a civilization was in the Enlightenment, which is about 1680 to 1800, the 17th century. And it happened in Europe with one outpost in the U.S. We invented representative democracy, but they invented, or the West basically invented 6 foundational inventions of the modern world, basically. It was like, one was the mechanical engine, amplifying physical power. Second was carbon energy at scale, coal, initially, but then through everything else. Third was financial capitalism. Before Enlightenment, nobody trusted sending gold around the planet to sit in somebody's bank. It's like, no, you had to build a system that was trustworthy. They built it. Third one was industrial production. that with that money, they basically scaled the machines and used the coal to fucking build industrial production. The fifth one was the nation state. Before there were kingdoms and empires and everything else, but it wasn't, nation state. And the final one was representative democracy, which was more the U.S. France tried, had a total fail, ended up in Napoleon's dictatorship. But anyhow, the point is, as a package, that's the modern world. We're on that same system right now. Those are the fundamental foundations of the world. And you know what? Everyone's fucking up. Carbon energy's screwed the planet up. Financial capitalism, there's like a handful of billionaires own as much as 40%, 50% of the planet. Anyhow, you can go through the whole thing. Industrial production is like, got toxic waste and plastic bottles floating in every ocean and everything. Okay, that system had its time. It was an advance at the time, made sense. We all kind of progressed from it. It's over, folks. At some level, we got to get beyond these things. We can monkey with them for a while, but there's a foundational different thing. And I'm thinking if it's possible that AI is going to give us that level of change, and if it's true, then you start really thinking foundationally, not just like, well, every 80-year thing. This is like, well, how would you build representative democracy? Like, what's democracy look like in a world of AI? What does capitalism look like in a world of AI? What does, the nation state, which, by the way, is a knucklehead way, climate change, there's 200 nations, completely sovereign. They can do whatever the fuck they want. And we got climate change happening. It's like we got to coordinate everybody on stuff. It's a system that doesn't make any sense for the 21st century. So anyhow, the point is, what is that next system? So then they get into like, whoa, your eyes just pop because holy shit, you talk about innovation. Now we're in real innovation. And that's what freaks people out. Most people. You talk about that in the Bay Area, and people's eyes light up. It's like, oh, that's awesome. Let's try that. I would love to bring democracy or something.
Well, let's take it step by step here. So those are all great questions that we have tried to talk about for the last 16 years on my podcast. But taking it step by step, one concern that people would have is something like this. So you have these fantastic, neat 80-year-old epochs, and they're brilliantly slotting within the reverse history of the United States of America. But the concern is in between. We had the Civil War.
Yeah.
We had World War I, the Great Depression, the Great Recession, World War II. We had literally, just in the United States, maybe 1 million people dead during the Civil War. And then in the world, maybe World War II and World War I was like 50 or 60 million people dead. Not to mention Europe was burned. Germany, which was the most powerful nation in Europe, was leveled. Like even the victors were leveled in many ways. Total devastation, starvation, and all of it. So the question is, let's presume your thesis is correct. If we are at the transition period between these epochs, and we're not just talking United States, we're talking, totally, as you say, civilizational level.
No, it's big.
Right. So let's presume that thesis is correct. But the transitions are drenched in blood and violence as a price to be paid for the new world. Is that not so? And what
well, you're asking good questions that I haven't talked about. I thought about this a lot. So here's my quick hit on that, or a hit on that. It is absolutely true that even if you just focus on those 80-year things in America, they all ended up, and including the one in the 1930s. Well, first of all, around World War II, of course, it was a global geopolitical, war. But even internally, I don't know how many people know this, but in the 1930s in the United States, we had our own internal fascist crew. I mean, the Republican Party were...
Let's make America great again originates then.
Yeah, exactly. America first, all that kind of stuff. And there was also a lot of violence, and, communists were clashing with brown shirt, kind of fascists and the whole, and, the Nazis were renting out Madison Square Garden. And, anyhow, it's like people forget, well, we kind of try to forget a lot of those epics. But anyhow, yeah, they get crazy at those junctures. Now, So anyhow, I get that, and I also get this pattern of war. And if you go back to civilizations, the same thing happens with the civilization going back. So the question for me, I've been thinking a lot about this, is one is the two things about war. They do two functions. One is the war comes between people who are essentially invested in the old thing and invested in the new thing, or more invested, that you kind of see this. And every one of these junctures, you essentially watch that pattern play out. So the question then is it possible to manage that polarization and that clinging to those two ways without a war? Now, you can say it's always had wars, but to be fair, since World War II, we haven't had another global war. We haven't had a nuclear war. I mean, there is a kind of a sense that are we entering a stage of human development or something? That sure, there's going to be local things and crazy stuff happening on the local level, but there's not this, I mean, that there's some kind of wisdom or something. We've got to get to this point where we don't need an all-out global war to solve this next one. Anyhow, that's just one question. It's not a guarantee, but I'm just thinking there is something like, does it always have to be the war thing? The second thing about it, though, is really interesting. I've thought a lot about this one, which is in order to walk away from the old thing, it's better if it's destroyed. And in other words, Germany and Japan built off, and including, like you mentioned, even the victors there, Soviet Union or even Britain after World War II, is like, but certainly the losers, they built off, I mean, everything was destroyed, right? So they're starting from scratch on the next system. And there's something kind of like, how necessary is it to essentially build fresh off the next infrastructures, the next ideas, the next systems in as fresh a way as you can go? And is war, at least in the past, how integral has that been to clearing the way? By the way, you talked about earlier about how far China has gone. The one pushback I would say to that, I mean, I didn't at the time, but I will say it is one of the things that you could say that happened in China. China was so primitive. They didn't have infrastructure. I mean, they literally didn't have infrastructure. When when I was there in my first time I came in there was like in 1989 in the Tiananmen time. I took a train from Hong Kong to Chengdu, which is the base of the mountains going up into Tibet. And it took me 4 days, 4 nights. It was wounded through the entire countryside. It was a steam engine. I mean, it was something from the 19th century. I mean, they were putting fucking logs and shit into the thing, coal and stuff. And this time I went from Hong Kong to the same place, Chengdu. It took me 8 hours, not 4 days, and it was all high-speed train. It all had, tunnels right through the mountains. That it didn't have to go around any mountain. It just went right through the freaking mountain. And all high-speed trains, super fast. Everything worked. It was gorgeous. But why was that? It's because they didn't have anything. I mean, it was you could always have treated it like it was a bombed out, flattened surface of starting from nothing. So anyhow, the point is progress. You can build progress, but there is something about how do you get beyond the old infrastructure. And I think a lot of the problem for the U.S. now is we did what China did. We did it in the 50s and 60s. I mean, that was the post-war thing. We built interstate freeways and suburbs and housing and all that shit, manufacturing, the whole thing. And so anyhow, there's a little bit of like, how do you get to? So here's what I'm trying to think is Trump sufficient to screw shit up so badly that we can walk away from it in the US? I mean, it's kind of a weird thing to say, but I'm not like, people are horrified by what Trump's doing. I'm kind of like, you know what? We got to start over pretty much almost on a lot of stuff. For example, government has to be, I think we should start over on AI. I mean, I just think government state capacity going forward is going to be the next thing. It's going to be an AI based, kind of infrastructure. And these old bureaucracies where you got chains of command of all these different middle managers kind of passing the thing, and all the shit and all the old computer systems, going back to
Can I
COBOL
push
and everything
back on
else.
you
It's like
here a
that
little
shit is
bit?
just, we got to start over. So anyhow, it sounds a little radical, but I'm saying that's one of the weird things about these junctures is somehow you got to get to that mentality of let's start fresh.
But is it? Let me push back here a little bit, because I had the, in my opinion, best historian on the Renaissance here a couple of months ago, and we had a 3-hour conversation exactly on that topic, if you will, with her, Ada Palmer. She's from the University of Chicago. And she wrote this like monumental 800-page book called Inventing the Renaissance, Myths of a Golden Age. And she talks about it, how golden ages are not historical artifacts. They're complete fabrication by people who have a certain political agenda to push. That's why, for example, the Renaissance doesn't have starting dates, doesn't have ending dates, doesn't have major events that people agree upon. Because if you are, let's say, pro-capitalism, you're going to give specific dates that create the Renaissance as the beginning of capitalism, and you're going to name certain events in support of that thesis. If you're pro-freedom and democracy, you're going to give completely different dates and completely different events that support the thesis that the Renaissance was the birth of democracy. If you're pro, let's say, banking, you're going to give completely different dates. If you're pro arts and science as cultural breakthroughs, you're going to give completely different dates. So much so that, we can talk about differences of centuries. That's number one. And number two is, she was so the idea of a Renaissance, which means rebirth, also invents the idea of a dark age. So usually it's an insult to the present in order to justify a certain corrective action for the future. But the lesson here that I would recommend you look into her book and her work is this. She said people often think that the biggest takeaways from the Renaissance were breakthroughs. That's false. The biggest breakthroughs for the Renaissance were not original. They were not new. They were things that were previously built upon. Those things like democracy, those things like arts and science, those things like banking, they didn't start in the Renaissance. They were built upon during the Renaissance on the previous structure. So the people who were pushing for let's destroy everything to build a new world actually ended up destroying a lot more and not creating much new. The people who in the Renaissance actually pushed the idea, let's reform the things, they were very slow, they were hard to adapt, but looking back from a historical point of view of several centuries, those were the ideas that actually survived. Again, democracy is not an idea in the Renaissance. It comes all the way from ancient Greece and stuff like that, but there were many iterations. Same with banking, same with capitalism, same with human rights or freedoms or the republican form of government, because people often give Florence as, a republic or the proto-republic, the first republic and stuff like that. But all those ideas were things that were not original. They were things that were built upon. And so she told me that the thing that we need to take away are two questions that we need to ask of every person who proclaims a new golden age. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because I know your next argument, next claim is that we might be entering a new enlightenment, as you call it, another golden age. She says you need to ask two questions of anyone who claims of a new golden age. Are we talking about the golden age now or laying the eggs for the golden age to come at the cost of utter devastation right now? Because the so-called golden ages, and take the Renaissance for example, one of the reasons why it was hell on earth at the same time it was a golden age was, for example, very easily measured in life expectancy. So in the 1200s of Europe, life expectancy was 37 years old. During the Renaissance, in the most advanced Italian states like Florence, which was at the cutting edge, life expectancy was 18 years old.
Because of basically wars?
Because of a variety of factors. One of them was progress, because people were traveling a lot more, so the plague would get around a lot more and all those things. But also because there was a constant situation of war of all against war, all, and there's all kinds of complicated issues and all kinds of multi-complex thing. But basically, life expectancy went down by 20 years backwards, and it was such a hell on earth that we had people writing to Machiavelli, he needs to write the history of Italy so that the future generations would not believe how bad it was. Those are the letters to Machiavelli. That's why he wrote The Prince, to avoid repeating the mistakes of his day. And the same, by the way, with the birth of the Industrial Revolution. Imagine being a shepherd living in the countryside of England, on a green pasture, what kind of life you would have. Now imagine being stuck somewhere in Edinburgh or in Glasgow or even in London in like 10 by 10 square feet, working, 14, 16 hours a day from the age of 3 years old, when the Thames is toxic soup of poison, when the air is poison, and you have no unions, no pay, nothing. So which lifestyle is better? The shepherd or the one who is actually becoming the proletariat, right? And Yuval Harari actually makes a similar argument for the agrarian revolution. He says that it's the biggest fraud in history because if you look at the hunter-gatherers, they were of bigger stature, they were taller, they were living longer lives, they didn't have any of the chronic conditions that the agricultural society started having. Mass disease, smaller stature, we see hunchbacks showing up, we see all kinds of chronic disease showing up, and a lot more working hours per day to be an agriculturalist than to be a hunter-gatherer, right? So those are the kinds of questions that might actually help you improve, I think, or test even that thesis about a complete blank slate as a beginning rather than building upon the previous.
Well, yeah, no, it's it's one of these difficult issues because the point is, you can say, well, the poor guy in Yorkshire, who, coming in from the thing, but on the other hand, you and me are sitting here talking over, video links across the planet for nothing. And basic as the Industrial Revolution was able to kind of build up this system that we're all kind of now enjoying. So there is a kind of a progress side. Now, could it have been done better? Yes.
But let's say we are very partial here, right? Because we are the beneficiaries. We didn't have to pay the price.
Yeah.
Someone else had to pay the price for us to enjoy the standard of living we're enjoying and the fruits of the Industrial Revolution.
Well, I did an essay recently for Substack, which I do, which for those actually who are listening, if you're interested, The Great Progression 2025-2050 is an essay, a series of essays in Substack. I do about one a month now, but for a while I was doing one a week for a bunch of to rough out the early part of the book. Anyhow, long story short was I did one recently where I was rethinking, it's just kind of related to what you're saying here. Like there's been this backlash against globalization, certainly in the West. That's partly why Trump and, the kind of rural populists and all kinds of stuff, white working class has been, so angry because, all the issues around globalization and, the economy shifted to manufacturing to the Asia and the whole thing, China. And, I get that argument, but I also, and I get how that could have been managed better, no question. But I also kind of then put in this article, I was like, honestly, depends on whose perspective is globalization failed. Globalization was a fantastic success if you take the average person on planet Earth, meaning, we had 40% of the planet in 1980, 85 even, was living on less than $2 a day. It's extreme poverty. It's like less than 10% now. It's about 8 to 9%. It's like, that is progress. That's like, the guy, but a lot of that's from China And a lot of it's because they were moving them from the countryside into these, cities and, taking the jobs from the guy at, Youngstown here in Ohio. But there is this management thing, but I'm also trying like, what is the, like, for who is it's your kind of question, which is, are we really going to reshape the global economy because these few guys, these people in, whatever, Youngstown are all mad and they're, let's burn down the system and like throw tariffs up and screw the whole kind of, rest of the planet up in terms of its free flow of kind of goods and all that. So it's kind of, you're right. It's depending from who. I think increasingly, though, I do think it's going to be seen as through the lens of the average person on planet Earth, rather than, the privileged, white working class of, America or something, or Europe. Trump wants to go back to 1950. The 1950s here, right? When the white working class, they had great manufacturing jobs. Where America dominated the entire global economy with all the industries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, but if you're the average person on planet Earth in the 1950s, it's like, dude, you don't want to be in that world. That is like a fucking mess.
So here's let me give you another something bone to chew on. So this is where I think your argument could be potentially better. So I can see what you're saying about Trump, and it's an interesting kind of upside from the left on the downside of having Trump as a president. You're saying that, look, we have these historical swings from left to right and right to left, and then you go, Teddy Roosevelt and FDR all the way, and then we had Reagan and Bush Senior and Bush Junior, and then we had the Barack Obama blip there, and now we're having Trump. And so the natural thing next would be to presume, we're going to expect the pendulum to swing to the other side, so the 60% will become the left, and that's kind of like the gist of your argument. And
Well, Trump I will correct that in a minute, but okay, go ahead, finish your question.
And Trump is kind of part of this sort of progress that Silicon Valley is famous for, which is the creative destruction process. So you sort of like have Trump, he's like an elephant in a China store, he's going to destroy everything and in a way create a clearing or an opening for us to rebuild the United States and to rebuild the system. Here's my problem with that. So to manage that transition, right? So because we don't want another civil war, we don't want another world war. To manage that transition in a peaceful manner, we cannot have a total destruction of the China store. We need to have some continuity. We need to have some gradualness, if you will, something salvaged. Because if we yes, a clean slate is very powerful to rebuild as an opportunity, creates an opening and a clearing, but it comes at a cost of maybe tens of millions of people during World War II. And now, when we're in the 21st century, I'm afraid it's going to be hundreds of millions, not tens, right? And actually, the world is aligning right now, it seems, to a global confrontation. First, we have a war in Europe for the first time since World War II again. Then we have China getting aggressive more and more around Taiwan, right? So we have all of these things coming together. So I think that the way we hopefully manage this is not by complete destruction, but by having some kind of continuity. Now, you correct me if you think that I'm wrong.
Well. One thing I would just correct you. My analysis of it's not just this pendulum swing, left, right thing. That's it's just going back. It's left turn. What I'm actually proposing here, and this is what happens at these 80-year junctures, as opposed to in those 80 years, what you kind of described is how it works. You get tired of one party, you go to the other party, and it kind of is a swings every 12 years or whatever, however they go. But it's not a major change. What happens in the 80-year junction, which is why I think Trump is instructive in that way, is you do get a reconfiguration of a new majority that actually does have people left of center and right of center. Usually, in this case, it will probably be primarily on the left of center because it's the other side of Trump. But there's a significant amount of people that used to be Trump people or even were Republicans would be part of that next coalition. That happened in all these junctures. Basically, you had essentially a reconfiguration of a new majority that gets behind a different vision for the next thing. So it's not we're going back to Joe Biden, or we're not going back to Kamala Harris, or we're not going back to for that matter Obama. We're going back. There's something new now. That new thing, which is a whole other topic if you want to go into it, which is another thing, is I do think there's this sense of abundance is starting to touch in politics, American politics. I'm not sure how it fits in other politics, but there's a tech side of the abundance story, which you accurately pointed out, Peter Diamandis, and his first book was, I think, 2012 on abundance.
2012, yeah.
But there's a lot of people in tech. It's not just Peter. It's like I'm in that world too. There's a lot of us who have been kind of the tech optimistic.
Ray Kurzweil.
What's that?
Ray Kurzweil
there, but Andreessen's there now too. But it's not, and it even goes left to center, right to center. There's a whole crew that's kind of like, the abundance thing, and then, but it's been mostly a tech focused thing. And now what's starting to happen is we're thinking, well, what if we've reached this point where we can start to frame the politics, a big tent politics, in a new way, not just, hey, you go back to a Biden, but it's like there's this new thing called abundance, which is pro-market, pro-tech, pro-growth, a lot of things that both left and right can 60% of them can come together and say, okay, wait, that's something we want to do. Anyhow, there's something around that I think is interesting. And I think that's going to come up in the next couple of years here in this. It's already emerging, but it's essentially this next cycle is going to be important. My book starts, I don't want to bet the house on it, because in politics, you never know, and whatever, it could be some weird thing that will crash and burn. But basically, in general, that would be one of the things I'd point out is really interesting, because the general thrust of that framework is win-win, in my opinion. And now it doesn't get to the issues you just talked about. So to kind of return to your question a little bit on
how to minimize the costs.
The costs. I do think the transitional costs were badly managed in the globalization thing, for sure. I mean, we could have done so much better, and we didn't. It also happened, a lot of things like the Soviet Union in that early globalization phase. The West should have, and America itself should have helped them get on their feet with the democracy and global economy thing, so they weren't, end up, the oligarchs taking over. Putin's comes back, and now they're back in this, authoritarian trap that, we thought they were finally getting out of. Anyhow, but that was a mistake. There's a lot of mistakes here, and like, what could you have done better in these transitions? For that matter, the poor guy from the, we could have better housing in the Industrial Revolution, and have cleaner air and all that. I mean, but I'm just saying, realistically, looking back at it now, is like, that is huge. And this AI transition is going to be disruptive, and it is going to could be badly handled. And if it is badly handled, we're going to have a lot of trouble. But here's the thing that makes me actually hopeful, weirdly, and it's a little classist, but I would say the thing that's interesting about this juncture, unlike the last one, is it's going to hit the knowledge workers and their kids. And those are the people, it's going to hit the lawyers and the media people, the journalists, and all doctors, and the knowledge people, and they're the soft power people in any society. So the politics is going to respond to that crew in a way that they didn't respond to the working class and the old factory towns as much. They paid lip service to it, but they didn't really solve the problem. This one, I think they might solve the problem when you got people that could really mess with it in a big way. So I don't know. I'm a total optimist, though. So I will just give you that. It's like I'm kind of laying out what I'm trying to rough through here. I mean, could shit go wrong? Absolutely. What I'm really worried most about, and you're part of it over there in Canada, is like in the world right now, it is what they call, I guess, what do they call it? The Anglo West, the kind of England, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, that crew are some of the most pessimistic around AI in the world. I mean, in compared to even other mainland Europeans and stuff. I mean, I'm watching these things of happiness and fear of AI and all kinds of, I don't know what is going on in the Anglosphere, but it's basically something is freaking people out in a way that doesn't seem to be freaking. It's not freaking out the Chinese. It's not freaking out a lot of Asian countries. And now it might with time and whatever, and maybe we're the early canary in the coal mine. But my gut feeling is something weird is happening here that we got to be very cautious. If once you start down a slippery slope of I'm against AI, and I mean I'm talking to you, you're a tech guy, whatever. Your people are listening are tech people, but I think for all of them should be they're thinking we got to do everything we can to make sure we're not living in a society that is trying to shut down the most transformative super tool that humans have ever been handed to kind of change their world in fundamental ways. I mean, can we be more cautious? Yes. Can we use, be, aware of the risks? Absolutely. Can we help with the transition better than we've done in past things? Absolutely. But to take the position of stop this fucking train or, I think is really getting dangerous. And it's getting to the point in this country where it's getting kind of nutty. And then the point is once people get stuck in those frames, it's going to be really hard to pull them back and get them into the state of like, well, maybe I will try AI. People are like declaring no AI in school, no AI in my company, no
well,
AI.
Let's touch here on that for a second, and then we'll jump into the last couple of questions I have for you because we have about 11 minutes left, I think. So,
okay, and we can go a little bit over that, but I do have to get go get my my car, pick up my car.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we go a little bit further because I know we started a little bit late.
So it's been maybe a decade since I wrote this op-ed piece that we agree on. I think that I said technology is the future of politics and politics is the future of technology.
Well,
basically, that's what we're witnessing today. And the impetus behind my work for the last 16 or 17 years has been basically to bring the ethical conversation in the technology circles. So, and politics, at least in an ideal world, would deal with ethics or choose things based on sort of ethical lines, legal lines, and stuff like that, rather than self-serving ones. And, that conversation is something that we can build on. And that's, as I said, more or less everything I've tried to do for the last 17 years. But let's look at some of the examples of AI in the real world. So you, just like Peter, just like Stephen and many others, have given this example about education and how transformative AI personal tutoring will be all over the world. And I try to track that down. And to the best of my knowledge, it comes from Sal Khan's book. And in other ways, it's mostly based on presumptions or his personal experience. But hear me out when I'm saying that the evidence that we're starting to get from across the world is contrary to that presumption. Let me just give you 2 examples. And I'm not saying this as someone against AI. I am totally for AI. That's why my show is called Singularity FM. And I see the potential, but I'm worried as someone who grew up in communist country about the fact that our risk exposure grows simultaneously together with our capability exposure. So the biggest challenge that, in my view, that humanity is struggling with today is not a technological one to build ASI or AGI or whatever. It's one of wisdom. It's one of the difference or the gap between our scientific and technological power and our wisdom to apply it in a non-self-destructive, non-suicidal manner so that we can thrive rather than self-destroy ourselves. And so if you look at the evidence from 2 countries that I love in the world when I travel, Denmark and Norway. Denmark was an early pioneer in digital education, smart education, and all of that. And now they did that over a decade ago, and now they've went 180 degrees back. They've removed every smart device from the classroom. They're locking everything, and they're going back to paper textbooks because it was utterly devastating what they did to their educational generation for the last 10 years. Norway had the introduction of the 5-year-old iPad. No, I didn't say that right. Every 5-year-old child in Norway in 2015 got an iPad as part of their educational policy and environment. A decade later, and Norway was a leader in education measured in all these kinds of, whether it's math or all kinds of ways that they measure, educational progress and achievements of comparative analysis between all the different countries in the world. They measure geography, math, literatures, how many languages you speak, etc. Even reading comprehension in Norway plummeted in the last decade. And now they're going back on that too, and they're removing that. And there's a lot of research, child behavioral psychologists that I was watching, who say that we didn't evolve to be taught by AI tutors. We evolved to study best like Socrates did, human to human, mentor to mentor. And now that we have seen those examples of Norway and Denmark, of people who went all in on this, invested huge amounts of money, and actually went very substantially back, like Norway dropped by almost 15 or 20 points in that decade, was tremendous plummeting. People are saying we are not evolved biologically. We're not wired to learn from AI personal tutors. What do you think of that?
Well, the one thing I would say right off the top of my head is, I'm listening to it, I'm hearing it, I'm taking note of that. It's interesting. I didn't know those two examples. But one thing I would just say is there's AI or computer interaction in education before ChatGPT or before generative AI, basically, and there's after. And so anything that's been going on for 10 years, there was a lot of the, kind of educational stuff. Apple and everyone was trying to push it and stuff, but in general, nobody was super excited about it. You mentioned Sal Khan, two things about Sal. Have you read his book? I have read his book, actually. He did read a book on how he got early access to ChatGPT 4.
He's a brilliant guy, and he's done tremendous work in education.
Yeah, now I don't know if you know, but he's now working with TED, and they're building a whole nother, I think it's called the Khan
Academy.
No, it's not Khan Academy. It's TED Khan Institute or something. But it is trying to crack. It's not for K through 12. I think it's more geared for essentially a higher education version of online that could be more certificate based and maybe accredited. The long story short is he is an interesting guy. Now, at a side level, he's an interesting guy. I have read that book and kind of tracked this thing. But the thing I guess I would say to you is it's what's going forward. Even 2022, 2023, it was still like everyone was just like, holy shit, what does it do? Oh, it can make pictures, whatever. But the last couple of years have just gotten in a different league. I'll give you, I'm writing this book. I've written 2 other books before, including that first one. I had human assistants for both those books, dedicated human assistants. Happened the way I wrote them. I could do that and pay them and whatever I was with, or outfits that could do that. And they were instrumental and very helpful in the thing. I did this book using AI and not writing it. Every word is mine, everything else. But I will tell you, I was probably 2 to 3 times more productive. It was mind-blowing how useful it was. I learned so much shit that I would not have been able to do traditional means. And I'm like a professional journalist. I know how to suck information out of the ecosphere of everything. And this was just mind-blowing. And I even just when I speculate about how a kid could do, for example, just that dialogue with, you talk about Socrates. I was going to flip that around at you, which is, we don't have Socrates in class. We got 1 teacher to 30 kids. They barely can give a kid, a minute or 2. And when they go home, their parents don't know shit and they don't know how to help them. And it's like, they don't have Socrates. What they do, but if you talk to Claude or ChatGPT or, Gemini, whatever it is, you've got your Socrates. I mean, it's just amazing. They can just keep serving you fucking questions. They can keep asking things. They can point you in a million directions. They can tell you shit you had no idea about. I mean, it's just like unbelievable. It's like that's a tutor. And there are
and the evidence I gave you was a little bit selective, right? Because Norway and Denmark were very high on the list, so it's easier to see and monitor the drop. But if you're coming from the middle of Africa or sub-Saharan Africa or like southeastern Asia or something, then you're starting from the bottom.
Or something, a million things.
Yeah, if you're starting from the bottom, it will be a lot more likely you might go up. I can see that too.
And also, we're in the very early days. This is just like super early days. So, when I say the next 25 years, I think we could. So here's what I would say. The other thing about this is it's not anti-human. Humans absolutely need other humans to teach them, mentor them, model after them, grow models of a million things. Emotionally, deal with how to emotion things, how to collaborate with humans, how to do a million things. It's like humans are instrumental in the education thing. So the idea of like, we're going to displace teachers, no fucking way. I'm not talking about that. And that's just a false thing. I'm not saying you said that, but a lot of people get all freaked out. It's like, well, no, they're going to have humans now, but the human teacher is going to have 30, special assistants that's going to go deep. So they don't have to answer the knucklehead questions. They don't have to go over the 10th time the math problem that the kid just can't figure out. And can go home with them, and go home and solve it when mom doesn't have any clue what the hell algebra is. The point is, it's just like this crazy opportunity. And so you sit there and you go, I mean, honestly, we're going to figure out a better way to educate kids given that tool. There's a bunch of stuff. By the way, I've done stories on this in Substack, but also I've done them in my book here. There's a whole guy named Benjamin Bloom. If you want to go deep in the tutoring thing, that whole thing? I mean, they did a ton of studies in the 80s and 90s on real humans, and they found crazy things. Like you can take a kid at any part in the class, like all the way down to the getting Fs and then not have a clue what's going on. You put a human tutor on them and you get them in the top 5% of the class. I mean, this is consistent across any test. It is. And why is that? It's your Socrates thing. It's like the human can hear when your kid's disengaged. You can tell when the kid isn't really understanding it. You can actually nudge them a million different ways. You can actually take a break when they're kind of flagging. I mean, there's all the nuance of a tutor just is what the one teacher to 30 kids can't do. And so when you give that kid that thing, their brain is a sponge. They're just like sucking in everything. Totally solves it. And so the question is, we now have a cheap, abundant technology that's going to do that for basically free or almost free. Like, that's a crazy gift. That's just like, it's like, if you could, it's just crazy. It's just so big. What a big deal. And so I just think that I would just counter with, that, and as we're kind of winding out here, I mean, I would just say that's kind of where I try to keep going. Now, I'm not saying the issues and the pushback and there's a bunch of questions around it. I get all that. I think there's a lot of people. I'm not really talking about you. I'm talking about the kind of people out there that are naysayers and doomers. And, there's a lot of people trying to harp on all these angles of, but. And I'm just kind of sitting there going, I think what we need is to focus on, just like look it in the eye and look at what it is. It's like, it's this gift that humans have got to not just make way better systems. I mean, 10x better. The tech world, this is another thing I always have to explain to people outside of the tech world. And you're in the tech world. So, and you guys listening are probably tech world. But the point is, tech doesn't want incremental improvement. Nobody, when I had to get, investors to back my 2 media startups, they wanted 10 times their money back. They put in $1 million, they wanted 10 times back. And it's like, that's just the expectation of tech is like, it's going to be better by 10 times. Now that's the money side, but it's also improvement. You want 10 times as better. You want 10 times as cheap. It's like people talk 10 times like it's just the way you talk about tech. You talk about that in education today, and it's like, well, can we improve it by 2%, or something, or can we get 5 more kids reading faster or something? It's like, that's not 10x improvement. So I'm thinking, what I think we're on the verge of here is a society, it's an abundant society, which is like, let's make it 10 times better, and the same thing with healthcare. Healthcare is another one. It's just insane. I mean, you at least have something up there in Canada, and but it's like, we could make healthcare 10 times better. And one of the key things is you're going to have concierge, AI doctors who are going to monitor you all the time, just like what? Rich people. Rich people have concierge. They pay $50,000 a year for them. And they get to talk to the doctor anytime they want. And the doctors monitor them and give them a personalized kind of thing on their healthcare. And they're awesome. But it costs them $50,000 on top of everything else. I know this because I got friends who do that. They're doctors. And it's like, everyone's going to have that. It's going to cost you $5 a month or something, and it's going to be crazy. Now, that's 10 times. So why are we shooting for 10 times better situation? Anyhow, we can go through the whole thing. It's like, I think we're on the verge. And then this is what I'm saying. When I just told you what I did, I lived doubling or tripling my productivity with what I did in writing this book. It was the easiest process compared to the previous. It was the fastest process. It was the most accurate process. It challenged me in ways I hadn't challenged. It made me rethink fundamentals that I hadn't really thought about. It was like having a real deep partner. It was the best assistant. I've had human assistants. I'll give you one last thing about this, just to put it out there. It's like, I've been a Kindle guy for 20 years. I've kind of, highlighted all my passages, and it's like, it's my little coded way. It's the way I navigate what I've read in the past. For this book project, I exported, which you can do out of Kindle, all the highlighted passages for everything I've read for 20 years, which is hundreds of books. Put it into Notebook LM, Gemini's thing. If you haven't tried it, you probably have, but if your readers haven't tried it, Notebook LM is just awesome. I put it in a notebook, and I had read everything of relevance that I had read in 20 years. And when I said, give me the 3 best passages from what I've already read about, basically bioengineering, blah, blah, blah. And it gave me, that, and said, hey, here's 3 more if you just want them. If I would have said that to my, woman or guy who's my executive assistant, on my research thing, it's like they were looking at me like, I have no fucking idea what you read. I have no idea how to figure that out. It's like, of course, it's impossible. So it made me, how do you quantify that? That's just crazy productivity breakthroughs. That's going to go to everybody. And it's like, how can that not be a good thing? It's just going to be nuts. Anyhow, we're getting, I'm reaching to the converted here, but I'm just trying to pass on to your readers. Like, we're living in this crazy moment here. We're like, holy shit, we got machines that can do that now. Wow.
You're an eternal optimist. I'm more of how did Gramsci put it? I'm a pessimist of the intellect and optimist of the spirit or the soul. And I really hope you're correct. Let me ask you, where can people find more about you and your work? What's the best place?
Well, the best place is my website, which is my name, Peter Leyden, and that's Leyden, peterleyden.com. If you just Google Peter Leyden, it'll almost always pull it up fast. I also have a Substack. You can get through my name, or it's The Great Progression 2025, 2050. I also I have a YouTube channel in my company called Reinvent Futures, which is a strategic foresight company. That has its own website if you want to do that. But so Google Reinvent Futures, but also it has a web YouTube channel, which is called Reinvent Futures on YouTube. And you can get a lot of my latest videos. There's tons of ways to follow me and do all that kind of stuff. I would
recommend all of those, by the way, but especially the Substack, because people can have the opportunity to jump into the depth of your argument there based on all the articles that you have published for the past, and that are very specific and in-depth and very well done. So I highly recommend those.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thanks for shouting that out. Yeah, absolutely, people follow. And then, like I say, early next year, we're going to have the book out. And it's been great having me on the show.
Let me ask you the last question, though. What's the message, the final message you want to send us away with? What's the one thing that you want people to take away from our conversation today?
Well, I would just say this is like a lot of people are worried. A lot of people have kind of, a bunch of things going on there. I'm the kind of thing is like, there is a positive reframe. I use that phrase, positive reframe, that almost everything going on around us today, certainly in the technology world, but even in our politics, in our geopolitics, in all kinds of ways. There is another way to see what's happening that I call the positive reframe of what's really going on today. And that thing makes all the difference in the world. Now, it doesn't mean you make shit up, and just like, making stuff up about what's going on. But you mentioned, for example, the Trump thing. I mean, I have more friends, I'm living in the Bay Area here, which is generally a more liberal place, California. I have so many friends and people that are just pulling their hair out. They're just going nuts by Trump. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, there's, I get all that complaining. But, there's another way to think about it, the positive reframe. And that kind of gave you the positive reframe of it. It's like, well, someone had to break it down. And I didn't even give you the other kicker on that. But the kicker on it is like, whoever takes down those old systems is going to bear the political costs. And so what Trump is doing, there's two things he's doing. I don't know what your politics or your listeners are necessarily, but he is dismantling the old system. He is stress testing including representative democracy and everything else. He's stress testing the system to its extreme, breaking much of it down, dismantling much of it, undercutting a bunch of it, just blowing the China shop, as he said. But he's also alienating huge chunks of the American population, including the crew that got him in there relatively narrowly, but got him in there in the last election. And the thing is, the entire Republican Party has bound itself up with him. So what it does, and this happens at every one of these basically historic junctures of the 80-year junctures, is one side takes the political hit that actually clears the space out for a generation or two. And it basically gives the space, the running room for the new coalition to build the next thing without having to be nipped at their heels all the time. And I'll give you an example. The last time we went through this, World War II, coming off World War II, the bugaboo, the guy who was seen as the demon was Herbert Hoover, President Herbert Hoover, who was over there when the great crash happened in 1929. He was the guy that started the Great Depression and did all the wrong things to make it worse. And FDR, who came out of that kind of conflict later, kind of basically was elected after him, used him as the bad guy for all four of his terms. He was elected 4 times because all I had to say was like, go back to Hoover. Hoover's like horrible. And then, but it kept going for 25 years. It took all the way to the 60s. It took all the way to basically Ronald Reagan. It took till 1980, which is about a 50-year run, to get Ronald Reagan to finally come back and people would listen to the politics that essentially was Hoover's politics, free market capitalism and kind of deregulatory everything. There were Republicans between there who were president, but they were essentially working within the kind of parameters of, the general consensus after the war of, Nixon started, Earth Day and, was like the environmental president. So, Eisenhower was building all the infrastructure, anyhow, he was a Republican, but he was also building the infrastructure of the country. So there was a consensus on both parties that lasted for 50 years. And it took Reagan to finally come back and say, let's go do something different. This is what Trump's doing. Trump is going to clear this. I mean, maybe not 50 years, but it'll be a chunk of time. There's no one's going to touch this politics for the next 25 years or so. And that gives you the space to build the next thing. So anyhow, I don't know how many people I might have pissed off with that rant, but I'm just telling you, this is what I think is happening. High stakes, big.
I actually appreciate it because for me, that's the key message I'm going to take from you. And that's literally, there is another way to look at the world, and it is called a positive reframe.
Yes.
Full stop. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I brought you in today, because I feel like I need it. I do. I get super depressed. I'm like your friends. I'm in Canada and I feel like we're too close to you guys, honestly. I get super depressed and super scared and super bummed out and hopeless just watching what the hell is happening there. And so there is another way of looking at that. You've given us a glimpse of it, maybe, I don't know if you're right. I'm afraid you may not be, but maybe you're right. Maybe that's what we need so that we have the opening and the clearing for the world to get back on track. And maybe that's going to carry us over for the next 50 years through that transition because of the damage and the political cost that, Trump and the like will be paying for that. So I really hope you're correct, and I appreciate your message and taking the time to be here with us.
Well, it's been a great conversation. And so I'm very happy you invited me. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have a really spirited conversation. Also, I love a lot of your points are totally well taken and also ones I'm going to think a lot more about. So I appreciate you laying out your big ideas too. So thanks for having me.